Hey you, welcome back to another episode of Mind Unravel. I am your host, Imani Mitchell, also known as your favorite wellness educator. If you are watching this video, we are officially in 2024, so Happy New Year to each and every one of you. I am so grateful for you for your support of this show, but also I just want to acknowledge that you are supporting yourself, right? You are showing up for yourself. If you are watching this episode, you've been watching the show, or this is your first time watching the show, you are here because you are trying to increase your self-awareness, to start internal conversations and some external conversations that will lead you to just fulfilling or experiencing a richer life and really fulfilling your greatest potential. So, for this episode, I wanted to talk about how vulnerability really increases our inner strength, but then it also helps build our communities. I felt that this was such an important topic to bring to the table because in my last video, or my last episode, I mentioned something that required a lot of vulnerability for me, and then and if you did not catch the episode, please take the time to go do so right now. But the topic was around continuing to press forward despite uh, lack of motivation, um, just feeling exhausted with the healing journey, and so on and so forth. So, again, go check that out. But then after that, I went on Instagram and I made essentially, I don't want to call it a follow up post because it stood on its own, and it was not connected to the episode as far as like directing traffic to the episode. But essentially, the message was the same, just obviously in a shorter and condensed form. But I wanted to just really, my sole purpose of, making that post was to share the things that I have been going through, but then also to encourage others who may have found themselves in a similar position, just to keep going, right? Because, and I just want to say this, but this, this episode is not about this, but it's important to just keep going, to just not stay stuck in the pain, stuck in the challenge, stuck in whatever, downfall or down place that we may find ourselves in. But anyway, I found that after I made that post, I was very anxious. I was very anxious because, and also as well as publishing that episode, I was very anxious of other people's perceptions of me. Now, more so on Instagram because a lot of people know me personally there. And I don't really know who is all watching these episodes. But anyway, I felt very anxious. There were so many times where I was like, okay, maybe I need to archive this post, delete it. But it dawned on me that people need to see that I am not always on the up and up, right? People need to know that I am also going through things as well, that I am human. But most importantly, I want people to be able to see themselves within me. And again, we are all going through our own respective journeys, and that it looks differently, but I feel that we can all attest to having moments where life just didn't feel like the sunniest of suns, or whatever. It just wasn't as bright as it could be or as it could feel. And so again, I just wanted to be that mirror, but then again, like I said, also to encourage someone to keep going, because it's important, because on the other side of that are just so many blessings, so much fulfillment, just a much greater experience, and we grow stronger, right? So so without further ado, let's hop right in. And if you've been here before, you know that I'm always going to start us off with a definition. So vulnerable is an adjective. It means able to be easily, physically, or mentally hurt, influenced, or attacked. Now, most people, whether you know the exact definition of vulnerable or not, most of us feel that being vulnerable is a bad thing because we are exposing the most sacred parts of ourselves, and we are opening up ourselves to criticism, to rejection, to abandonment, just so many different things, right? But I feel that what the definition didn't mention, and what we just need to continue to, or what I feel that continuously needs to be talked about, is how vulnerability, it creates a high level of inner strength, but then it also creates stronger bonds, not only with ourselves, but with other people as well. And so the first thing that I want to mention is that every time that we're in a position that requires vulnerability, and we actually are vulnerable, we are exuding strength, because in spite of all of the negative things, the harmful things, the hurtful things that we could be met with, we decide to continue to press forward. Take for example a police officer. In my eyes, I feel like they are some of the most courageous people, because they are literally on the front line of defense. They understand that it is a part of their job to meet potential danger and hurt and harm. They understand that, right? And so, but in spite of that, they continuously show up and to do their job, knowing what could come at them. And that is the same thing. Let me rewind. Let me finish that off. That requires a great level of strength and courage. And so that is the same thing that same notion applies when we do something that requires vulnerability, when we say something that requires vulnerability. Because again, we understand that, hey, we could be met with pushback. We could be met with, again, criticism, hurt, judgment. And so every time that we do or we say something that requires vulnerability, we are subconsciously showing ourselves how strong we are. And then when we're met with another opportunity that looks similar, right? We've started to program our minds to help us remember that, okay, yes, I may face any of those aforementioned things, but I can handle it. And that is where that internal strength starts to build up, because mentally we're prepared, emotionally we're prepared. And we also can start to understand that although someone may not understand what we have inside of us as far as a thought, an idea, a business plan, a business idea, or a song, or just whatever it could be, we start to be able to condition ourselves that as long as we are okay within, it's okay with whatever we receive on the outside. And another thing, and this kind of leads in this internal strength that we start to build up, it kind of leads me to another moment of strength, and that is each time that we talk about something that may be like for instance, for me, I'll say, like when I first started doing yoga, I did not feel confident in it at all. And so I felt that I wasn't qualified. I felt that I wasn't equipped enough with all of the tools and the knowledge to be able to actually guide my students through a safe and effective practice. And if I would have shared that, with someone, and also if I would have, or when I didn't, how do I want to say this? I'm trying to tie in this example, but then also communicate the point that I'm trying to make, and essentially the point that I want to make, and maybe the example will come out as I'm talking. But essentially, when we talk about the things that maybe we're ashamed of, maybe we have some guilt around it, maybe there's some fear, when we do the things that we're scared to do, me teaching yoga in the beginning stages, when we release a creative project, when we write that song and we release the song, or again, whatever it may look like, when we do those things and we continue to do it over and over, we strip the power away from that fear, from, that shame, that guilt, that imposter syndrome, thoughts of being unqualified, all of those things, we strip the power away and we start to feed our courage. We start to feed our strength. And that allows us to continue to be vulnerable, to continue to share, again, those sacred parts of ourselves that are near and dear to our heart, that we don't want, to get harmed, and we don't want to be criticized or judged. We're able to do it more openly and freely. And it feels so good to be able to do that, because again, on the other side of that, you see the strength. You see how we see how we're no longer captive by all of those things that were meant to deter us from being open, from being vulnerable. And then another thing that I want to mention is that when we share the most inner parts of ourselves, when we do the things that represent the most inner parts of ourselves, then, sorry, I'm forgetting my point. But when we do that, then we're able to surpass, okay, well, let me rewind. When we do that with other people, we're able to surpass the very core, we're able to surpass the surface level of a relationship, right? Because we start to get to our core. We start to understand, and this also applies for ourselves, right? Because how we interact and engage with ourselves it directly impacts how we engage with other people. And so when we take the time to, get to our core and understand who we are, understand what it is that we're passionate about, what it is that we want to do, when we see, okay, these are just some limiting beliefs that I have around, this particular business idea, or again, for me, I realized how I was often holding myself back because I was afraid of how people would perceive me, but also I was scared about, and I just really kind of just unpacked this as I was preparing for this episode, is that oftentimes my fear of judgment from others really stems from my fear of judgment of myself, because I am not viewing myself in the highest regard. And so I feel that, okay, maybe someone else may view me in that way. And I don't want to be seen as someone who's, not prepared, not qualified, not able to do this work. And so I'm able to, so when we do this, when we start to be vulnerable with ourselves, again, we're able to get to our core. We're able to start to do what is necessary to heal and push past our limiting beliefs, push past our fears. And again, when we do that within ourselves, then we're able to do it with other people. And that leads to stronger relationships. And another thing about when we are choosing to be vulnerable with other people, then we are less likely we're less likely to feel alone and unsupported. Because here's the thing, if we are not sharing it, and I am very, very much guilty of this. Oftentimes I feel that I am so alone when I have, quite a few people around me in my corner and that are part of my support system. But here's the thing, the support system is only as good as we allow it to be. Meaning, if we're not sharing the things that we're dealing with, if we're not sharing um, our passions, if we're not sharing these things with our people, they won't know what needs need to be met. They won't know that we need to be supported, especially if we're going around acting as if everything is okay. If every time someone says, "How are you doing?" you're saying, "I'm good, I'm great," but really not being honest with how we're really feeling, or what are we really going through? What's really happening in our lives? And another thing is that we feel less alone when we share, because sometimes we may find that someone else is also experiencing a similar situation, a similar feeling, a similar thought, a similar path. And then when we find that there are some commonalities there, then we're able to support each other. We're able to encourage and uplift one another, because that is what we're meant to do. We are meant to be able to love each other. We have been designed to love one another, to encourage one another, to stand in the gap when we need each other, when we need for a refill. And I want to be clear that I am not suggesting or not encouraging and I'm saying be very weary and be very intentional about not developing codependent relationships or even trauma bonded relationships. And please look up those terms if you're unfamiliar with them. But the goal is to provide loving support that allows us to still stand on our own, but it allows us to continue going because we know that we're not going through this life alone. And so I just want to end with, I just had to check my notes to make sure I wasn't missing anything, but I just want to end with that being vulnerable takes strength. It takes courage. You are by far deemed as weak. You are by far, I can't even think of any other thing right now, but I just want to encourage you all that there is strength in vulnerability. There's courage in vulnerability. There's growth in vulnerability. There's community in vulnerability. So I leave you all with some questions for you to journal. The first question is, how does being vulnerable make you feel and why? What's one thing you can share that will draw you closer to a loved one? 3, when was the last time you were vulnerable with someone? What response did you receive? And if it was a negative response, how has that shaped your ability or willingness to be vulnerable now or in the future? Lastly, how can you be more vulnerable with yourself? So as always, so let me rewind. So please take some time to ask yourself those questions. You may not receive an answer right away. That is okay. But the fact that you have already asked yourself the question means that the answer will arrive in its due time. And I just also encourage you all that when you receive the answers, to, hold love, hold space for them. Don't cast judgment, because that also, like, that just hinders the process, and that's something that I'm still working on with myself. Is just as things come in, as I am um, coming to new information about myself, or wanting to make different decisions. And just, again, sometimes it's just important to move with love and to not be so critical of ourselves and to be so judgmental, because that just hinders the process, and it keeps us further away from making strides in the right direction. But again, answer those questions, or ask yourself those questions, jot them down. And I thank you so much for showing up for yourself, for showing up for this show. And I encourage you all to share, to comment, if you feel that any of this resonated with you, if you've learned something, if you and maybe you have something to add on to the conversation, please do so. Please, again, share if you found this video helpful, and subscribe to the channel for more episodes from Mind Unravel. And thank you so much, and I will see you soon.